Hi, everybody. I decided to leave my face off this because YouTube does a number on it every time I post it in Canvas. So today I'm going to talk at you a little bit. Before we get started, I want to remind you about some background after Reconstruction, after the Reconstruction era. I wanted to remind you that remember that African Americans experienced many legal advances under the protection of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the Civil Rights Act. Remember, they were allowed to vote and hold public office and own property. However, after Reconstruction, many of the legal gains made by African Americans during Reconstruction were not really put into place. Laws were put in place to prevent African Americans from voting, like poll taxes and literacy tests. It was also to prevent them from moving freely, intermarrying with whites, and conducting business. The laws also were designed to keep African Americans working under white people. African Americans who were not employed by a white boss were liable to be charged with vagrancy and put in prison, fined, or subjected to forced labor. Many states and local governments in the South passed laws enforcing racial segregation. In 1896, the Supreme Court upheld the separate but equal doctrine of Plessy versus Ferguson, which we've talked about before. Although states in the North did not enact Jim Crow laws on a similar scale, racial segregation was enforced in some northern schools, and intermarrying with whites was illegal in many places. African Americans living in the North also faced the specter of racial violence and were widely denied equal access to employment, housing, and education. Starting in the Reconstruction era, lynching became a widespread form of terrorism against African Americans, especially against those who had gained an economic or social foothold. Many African Americans became sharecroppers. Sharecropping contracts favored white landowners, often leaving sharecroppers in a cycle of debt they were powerless to overcome. So, after refreshing you about that, what I want to talk to you today is about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and the differences between them. Booker T. Washington was born into slavery in Virginia and was 9 years old when the Civil War ended. In 1875, he graduated from the Hampton Institute, a school established after the Civil War by Samuel Chapman Armstrong, a former officer in the Union Army. The school focused on teaching vocational skills and providing moral instruction to students who were formerly enslaved. Washington was a highly successful student at Hampton, and in 1881 he founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama to provide industrial and academic training for African Americans. Washington believed that industrial education, which focused on vocational training, would provide a way for African Americans to build social status and economic self sufficiency. Tuskegee trained both men and women under Washington's leadership, but the curriculum varied based on gender. Training for women focused disproportionately on historically female occupations like cooking, nursing, and sewing, while men tended to learn occupations like carpentry, shoemaking, and farming. Washington was not a strong advocate for women's rights, and he opposed women's suffrage. Remember, that's the right to vote. Washington was a skillful politician and public speaker. He used these abilities to win the support of politicians and philanthropists in the North and South who donated money to the school. Under Washington's leadership, the school grew quickly and became a highly influential institution in the region. W.E.B. Du Bois was raised in a free land-owning family in Massachusetts and attended integrated public schools. Du Bois was a talented student and became the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard University. Like Washington, Du Bois saw education as essential for Black advancement, but he had a different educational philosophy than Washington. Du Bois was not opposed to vocational education for some Black students, but he believed that African Americans should also have access to a classical education, which focused on academic subjects typically studied in the top schools and universities at the time, like math, history, Latin, and Greek. In particular, Du Bois believed that the most talented African American students and leaders, an elite group he called the Talented Tenth, should receive a classical education, which he believed would help to establish a class of elite leaders that would promote the rights and interests of all African Americans. Du Bois was an advocate for women's rights and favored women's suffrage, but he was not clear about what role women would play in his vision of the Talented Tenth. Some have speculated that Du Bois envisioned an unequal role for women, with men assuming most leadership positions, while others have emphasized the strength of his support for women's equality given the historical content. Now, I'm going to show you a video, not this second, but in class. And after that, this is the question we are going to be working on. How did the philosophies of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois compare? We will be going through documents and guiding questions to answer that question. Talk to you soon.